Good. Well, let's get underway. The first thing I'd like to do is just to give an acknowledgement of country and to all our people on various lands that we're on, and to acknowledge the traditional owners of those lands, and give our respect to elders past, present, and emerging. And now to the topic of today, Dr. Elise Bialylew, lovely to be having a conversation with you again.
It's great to be here, Craig. We've had a long kind of friendship and interaction over the years, and you've also been a great mentor to me. So thank you.
Yeah, well, we want to find out a lot about you and the work that you've been doing, not just with mindfulness, but philanthropy as well. So just a little bit by way of introduction. So originally trained in medicine at Melbourne University, specialised in psychiatry, and founded and runs the Mindful in May movement, and has a long-standing personal and professional passion for mindfulness and philanthropy. So mindfulness, Mindful in May has been tremendously successful. It's the world's largest online mindfulness fundraising campaign, and you've not only connected many thousands of people with mindfulness from around the world, but has catalysed the community to raise over $1 million to bring clean, safe drinking water to over 40,000 people across Africa. So in this webinar, we're going to be speaking about your work and how mindfulness can foster personal well-being as well as greater generosity and kindness to others. That's a fair bit to cover in our time together, but I'm sure we're going to give it a bit of a shake.
Right.
But I mean, yes, we have had connections. In fact, even before we knew each other, I used to work with your mother, Mookie, who used to at the Caulfield campus health service, and where she was counselling and I was working as a GP. But what was it that led you to go into medicine and then psychiatry? Was it the influence of your mother, or was something totally different? How did you wind up in this space?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think bringing my mum into it is appropriate because I believe where we end up has a large factor of like the context we were brought up in. And so, I've got this big bookshelf behind me, and I remember growing up with this bookshelf of my mum with all of the great teachers, John Kabat-Zinn, Sharon Salzberg. All those books were there, Jack Cornfield. She used to take me to conferences, Ian Gawler, and I remember sitting at the age of, 11 with the Tibetan monks doing some kind of death meditation practice and feeling quite amazed by it all, surprisingly. So I definitely was primed. I was really fortunate to have that exposure. But I think just inherently I had a primal impulse, as Maslow referred to it, someone that was very curious to understand, what does it mean to be here on this planet as a human being, and how can I make the most of this life? And so those were the influences that pushed me into psychiatry, because I was just insatiably curious about understanding the brain and the mind. And I suppose my dad was also a doctor, so I went to his clinic. So there was a lot of wonderful kind of exposure to the helping professions as well.
I suppose it would be hard to imagine that you would have done anything else with your life after all of that in your upbringing.
Yeah, it was pretty strong. And I think I always had a very strong humanitarian kind of sense of looking around at the world, traveled quite early and got exposed to developing countries. And that really had an impact as well, just as a child thinking, this isn't fair. How are these people living like this and we're living like that? So from a very young age, I think I had that sort of social justice bent in me as well.
So all of these sort of threads were interweaving themselves right from early in life. So mindfulness wasn't like done psychiatry and realised that certain approaches weren't working as well as you like, I'll take a different direction, etc. It really was it right from the start a path you were going to walk?
Oh, look, I think I read a lot about mindfulness and Buddhist philosophy, but I hadn't actually put my, as they say, tush on the cush until a lot later. In fact, I think they say you teach what you need to learn. And I think within my personality was this kind of drivenness and this difficulty being still and being in silence and all of the things that mindfulness bring you. So there was probably a bit of an antidote in what mindfulness had that was really helpful for me. And certainly working in psychiatry, although the field is life-saving and everything I learnt there was so important and valuable, what I wasn't finding there was how do we learn how to use our minds in the most effective way? And is there some kind of immunization that we can have that can protect us from the inevitable stresses that come at us over a lifetime? And in psychiatry, unfortunately, the way the system was, it was a lot about medication and not a lot about let's explore the mind and what can we know about the mind and how can we use the mind and train the mind towards optimal mental well-being. And that's really where mindfulness came in for me. And it just happened that while I was doing psychiatry, it was also where there was a real emergence of this whole field of contemplative neuroscience and where the Buddhist practices and the science were coming together. And I was attending lots of conferences and the science was really blowing my mind. And that really, I guess, the priming of mindfulness and then seeing the science and being in psychiatry, feeling that there was a missing piece, was what came together to kind of catapult me forward along that path.
Was your philosophical approach perhaps at variance with some of the ways in which psychiatry often looks at things? So for example, when somebody comes along with depression, which is very common, especially in the Western sort of developed world, and somebody might be told, oh, it's just a chemical imbalance in the brain. And there are chemical imbalances in the brain, so we're not going to suggest that there are not. But when it's just put down to that, does the kind of approach that you take and the interest in the mind, the contemplative side, say, well, understand that sort of perspective on depression in a different way?
Absolutely. I think what I've come to learn about myself, and I don't know why this is, was that I am inherently, I think, a systems thinker. Like I've always seen the world in its interconnections and mindfulness and its context, Buddhism, the whole philosophy really helps us to see more clearly the deep connections that we have both with each other and with the world at large. And so in psychiatry, I was affronted and it didn't sit with me very well that we were looking at individuals with a diagnosis. And it was it wasn't hugely systemic thinking, and it was sort of very, here's the chemical imbalance. And I could see it's so complex, psychiatry and mental health. We're not really just individuals. We are, and that was from the beginning of our conversation. I was part of a family, you're part of a family. We're all part of a context. And so I think, yes, I think there were things that I was seeing in psychiatry, and again, not to disrespect psychiatry because it's life-saving and it's so valuable, but I think the mindfulness piece together with that is a really helpful, it really allows for helpful perspective.
Yeah. So I suppose when sometimes if it's just the chemical imbalance in the brain, then just the chemicals, that's the solution. Whereas perhaps when considering this sort of more systemic thinking, I suppose, more the drivers behind it, then I guess it gives you and it gives the patient many more strings to add to the bow in terms of things that can be done to help. Would that be?
Absolutely. And, an example comes to mind where I was running mindfulness workshops. I was co-facilitating mindfulness training in a private psychiatry clinic. And we were working with people that were really unwell. I mean, some people were on 3 types of antidepressants because none of them were working. And, there was people with addiction. And so really unwell people. And I was actually quite amazed when I was running these programs that there were new perspectives that were coming for people. And this isn't to say that mindfulness is this panacea and, it fixes everything. Not at all. However, it was like a crack opened up, and so even this man who I remember was on 3 antidepressants and just had this hopeless mindset that is so characteristic of depression and self-loathing. And over the weeks, and he was so reluctant initially, and then over the weeks as he practiced, there were insights that came, and they were small, but they were sort of gaining a bit of momentum. And by the end, he was, in tears with some insights that he had. And of course, it wasn't that this had cured his depression, but I guess there was hope, and there was something new, and there was a new possibility there. And there was also, I think, a sense of empowerment for him, that actually there is a resource inside that is separate from the doctor giving you tablets that is available.
A bit more help coming from within, as it were.
Yeah.
Now, I believe that you had a bit of a fear of prolonged silence yourself. And so how did you overcome it? Did you confront it? Did it just sort of creep up on you?
I really like sharing this story because silent meditation retreats for me have been an absolute game changer. And it's like, for anyone that's interested in mindfulness that hasn't been on one, I wish for them to have that experience. And for me, I was absolutely terrified to go on a silent meditation retreat. I'm not sure why. I thought, oh my God, am I going to uncover some terrible thing that I don't know? Or I don't know. I was just scared. And I also thought I could think of nothing worse than sitting with my own thoughts and for 7 days, how on earth? And then we went I was fortunate enough to go on a training retreat. I believe you were there actually, with when John Kabat-Zinn came to Australia. And it was, I think, a 2 or 3 day retreat. And there was no mention that we were going to be put into silence until the first day. At the end of the first day, he kind of surprised everyone and said, right, for the next, it was a short period of time. I think it was maybe not even 24 hours. He said, we're going to go into noble silence, it's called in the formal terms. And I think about 30% of the retreat left from memory. I think people were really confronted by it, as was I. But I thought, I think I can do this. I'm here. I'm not going to leave. So I stayed, and it turned out that 24 hours of silence was just the most profound experience and offered so much learning for me, and also gave me the training wheels to have the courage to then go and do the 7-day retreats, which I've done many, and which have been just an absolute, a very deep process of learning that I feel has created very solid foundations in the practice.
Would you, and personal question perhaps, would you describe yourself more as an introverted kind of person or an extroverted kind of person, such that silence
any guess?
I wouldn't want to guess, because you can't always tell. But your public profile and everything would say one thing, but comfort, that you've brought in silence could suggest something else. But how would you describe it yourself?
I do think I actually think I'm both. I'm not sure about the two sort of definitions and boxes in a way, but I definitely feel I do get energy from people. So I would say extroverted. So I'm less likely to be in my own cave for days inside, doing my own thing. So I suppose that was also a less common habitat for me to find myself in.
Yeah, because there hasn't been a lot of research on this in the mindfulness space, but people with that sort of tendency to feel more comfortable just being with themselves often feel it easier to connect with mindfulness, and people, but we don't know if there are different kinds of personalities that are drawn. Have you looked at that? Is there much known?
No, I'm not sure. It's a really interesting point, but one memory comes to mind of a teacher that I had on a retreat who was an ex-monk, and he was running the retreat with his wife at the time, who he'd married after leaving monkhood. And I said to him, God, he was in solo retreat for about 3 years or something. And I said to him, how do you do that? And he said to me, to be honest, I find it much harder to be in the real world. Being in relationship is so much harder than being on a solo retreat for me. And he was referring to obviously his more introverted tendencies. And so I think depending on our personalities, things can challenge us in different ways.
Yes, I remember doing a leadership course, and we did all the Myers-Briggs, and I was asked, which are you, Craig? Do you think you're introvert or extrovert? I said, I'm not really sure. And she said, well, what really energizes you? And I just had this, came back to mind when I was in my early 20s as a medical student, middle of winter, and we had the mid-year break. And so I went down to Wilson's Promontory for 3 days by myself to hike, do the circuit of the prom. I was all by myself. I saw one person passing the other way on the track, and just as we passed, we said, "G'day, g'day." That was the only person I saw for 3 days. And when I came back from that, I was exhilarated. I just had this, boundless sort of energy. But for me, I didn't have the language of mindfulness in those days, but it was, the whole 3 days was so mindful, so present, so connected to the environment, etc. It was exhilarating. She said, "Yeah, introvert." So, I don't think the labels are always so helpful, but nevertheless, mindfulness, as you said in your apprehension, coming back to sit with yourself, to be with yourself, is not something we commonly do, not something we sometimes find very comfortable, especially when we're in times of stress, etc.
Yeah, and I'm just constantly amazed by the wisdom that is there when we actually come back to ourselves and open up to stillness and presence, and things always arise that we're just not conscious of in the busyness of everyday life. And our lives are so complex now more than ever, whether you've got kids or not, or you've got a busy job, and there's the juggle, and we miss so much of that inner data. And I think that mindfulness is such a helpful way of just touching base and knowing what's there.
Now, Mindful in May is a pet project that you started, some years back, and we'd love to hear more about that. And I've got to say that, being a lover of alliteration, and I can't help myself, so you were the very first person when we did Mindful May at Monash, was a kind of a play on that, and to invite you in to talk about the Mindful in May. So we'd love to hear, more about how that's going. But how for you did your mindfulness journey lead you to taking on something as big as this, as if you didn't have enough going on in your life, to start Mindful in May? How did you get to that point that you wanted to do that?
I think it really speaks to the magic of mindfulness in being a really powerful revealer. And what I mean by that is that I was in psychiatry, and there were many things I was fascinated by within psychiatry, but there was also a sense of disillusionment around, this is not quite my vision of where, I want to be in terms of the impact and how I want to help people. And perhaps also personality-wise, I'm a very sensitive soul, and so probably that fit was a little bit of a mismatch in a way as well. And also didn't probably have the tools, which I've after that learned a lot about. But I think how it ended up happening was that there was a gap of where I was and where I wanted to be. And I was in pretty intensive mindfulness practice. I was going to retreats a couple of times a year, and was really had an intuition that I'm not sure where I'm going, and I'm not sure where the place is for me, but I know this isn't quite right. So I'm just going to go and sit in stillness, and maybe that will help me. And it did, because I became just so fascinated and compelled by what I was learning. It was almost like that was the answer. That was the answer to the early questions I had about, what does it mean to be human? What is this mind? And so it took me to psychiatry, but that didn't really answer the questions or the longing I had. Whereas mindfulness and the incredible teachers I came upon along the way, it was like entering a whole new dimension and universe of the inner world. And so it was at a time also where technology was really changing very quickly. Social media was just a thing, like Facebook had just emerged. And I just saw an opportunity to try and get these tools out more broadly in a way that was affordable, because there were mindfulness courses that were about $500 or $800. And I was working with people that couldn't afford that in the public mental health system. So the idea was making it accessible to the masses, and also connecting it to a cause, because I think that's a really important aspect of mindfulness. It's not just about training yourself to be better and be more focused. It's actually how do we support humans to develop in their greatest potential in the way that's pro-social and that can contribute to the world at large. And so that was really the spirit of Mindful in May, bringing the mindfulness together with the social activism. And it started off as an experiment. I had no idea what I was doing. I went down psychiatry. I sort of went to my boss and said, I want to drop down to part-time. And my colleagues were like, are you planning on having a baby? And I said, no, I'm not having a baby. I was having a baby. I just didn't know it was in the form of an online campaign, but that was, I call it my first baby. Now I've got 2 other babies as well. But yeah, so it was a bit of a playful, organic process, but mindfulness actually helped me in that process of reinvention, of taking the leap, tolerating the uncertainty, trusting myself more. And it was actually, yeah, it was not only the ingredient that I got inspired by that led to the creation of something related to mindfulness, but it gave me the tools to leap into the unknown, which I think was pretty terrifying for me.
Well, I dare say terrifying for anybody. I mean, it's one thing to go and do some training on how to do this, that, and the other thing, but to actually just step into it. Was it a financial risk as well, or was it just...
Yeah, no, that was the scary bit. That was really, leaving a stable career in psychiatry, and I managed to do that in a way that felt tolerable. So it was sort of going part-time, so I had a bit of income, and then I could create this enterprise. But then there was a point at which I had to take a leap, and I didn't have the financial security. So that was, it was scary to do that. But it's been, yeah, a lot of learning.
It's not an uncommon thing that, somebody perhaps who doesn't really have experience with mindfulness, but, looking at it sort of superficially from the outside, are you just sitting down thinking about yourself the whole time on a cushion or on a chair or whatever? You should get up and do something useful with your time. And the reality of it is, it's the opposite of that, like sitting down practicing not thinking about ourselves, because that's often what the mind is kind of doing most of the time when it's churning, etc. So how is it that mindfulness really helps to facilitate, you mentioned before, pro-social, that sort of sense of pro-sociality, and how does it sort of foster that connectedness with others, which is so important, being part of a community, not just locally, but globally as well?
It's a big question. Just taking a moment to think which way to go with that.
Any way you like.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, as you say, we spend so much of our time, and the brain is wired like that, to be in this way, thinking about me all the time. That's sort of the default setting. And so if we can sort of open up a little bit and loosen around that me narrative, then we can start to include other and see from another's perspective. And I think within the mindfulness, I mean, we talk about mindfulness as one thing, and that often is referring to the practice of training your attention in greater stability so that you can see more clearly and ultimately, look at what the causes of suffering are in our lives. But then there's the whole realm of other practices within the meditation tradition, which are more around the heart, which I really love, these practices around compassion and loving kindness and empathic joy. And these are the practices that I think are really powerful in developing new neural pathways towards greater generosity, greater compassion, patience. And so they're all pro-social, and they're the things that can support us in meeting other people with more kindness and presence. So, I mean, that's just touching on one of the things. I think, there was work by Tanya Singer, who's been part of Mindful in May, and she's a phenomenal researcher in the field of empathy and compassion. And I was blown away by her research when I discovered that, this idea, because empathy and compassion is very much within the realm of this whole meditative practice, and discovering that empathy, which is feeling, experiencing the feelings of others when they're in pain, actually sets off our own pain pathways in the brain. And this is very relevant for any of the listeners in the health profession, that we can really fall into empathic distress. And this actually stops us from being connected to others, because we get burnt out. We actually can't, we're just trying to deal with the impact of trauma on ourselves. And so she looked at the difference between empathy and compassion and showed that when you meet someone else's suffering with compassion, which is actually first you have empathy, so I feel your suffering, but then there's an active move to look at wishing you well and a motivation to actually help alleviate your suffering. This activates a whole different circuitry in the brain, which is related to oxytocin and all of the good things and the affiliative centers. And so if this is an example of how these practices can actually help us meet others with more presence and generosity, because, for example, if we teach health workers how to practice compassion meditation, then we can alleviate a lot of empathic distress in the workplace, a lot of burnout, and that helps, meet other people in our full capacity. So that's kind of in a professional setting. But then in personal life, I mean, I can speak from personal experience of being a mother of 2 young kids, and I have a joke that they're my most profound meditation retreat. They're the most challenging retreat I've ever been on every day. Maybe not every day, but it's just a constant opportunity to practice and to practice managing our own nervous system dysregulation. And mindfulness is really helpful for that, because when you're more present, you can sense what's going on at the moment and realize, okay, I'm really triggered and dysregulated. And I say to them, Mummy's really flipped her lid and I'm going to go to the other room and take a few breaths and I'm going to come back. So, I mean, and that's modeling something very powerful to them. And so then it's transmitting more mindfulness to the next generation as well. So that's a long answer to your question, but I think it's a fascinating topic and it goes in so many different directions.
Well, in a world where so many more things are becoming or polarized, etc., there's sort of things that help to connect us. It's fascinating that whole step, like the very natural human experience of empathizing with how somebody is feeling. But it's like there's that fork in the road. Does it step into empathic distress if somebody else is distressed, or does it step into compassion? And actually realize there's a conscious ability to make that choice and to cultivate the ability to step one way rather than the other way.
Yes.
As you're saying, Debbie Ling at Monash, she works in the Department of Social Work at Monash, and she's done an amazing amount of work in this space as well. And we developed a course in compassion training for our medical students at Monash to help them with this, and for allied health professionals as well. So, because this is really important, but I dare say, not just if you're a health professional, but you're a parent.
Or in any kind of relationship where us humans are really good at triggering each other and setting each other off. Yeah. That's
right. So just for life in general. In terms of parenting, what does mindful parenting mean to you? What are some of the key sort of tips? We did have actually a webinar on mindful parenting a few months ago, but I'd be interested in your perspectives. What are some of the key messages or tips there? Because we've got some very hungry parents out there.
I get a lot of questions from people doing Mindful in May about, oh, can I do this with my child? And do you do meditation with your kids? And how long do you do it for? And all of this kind of stuff. And I do meditation with my kids, and we often use it at bedtime, which I know many parents are doing now, which is wonderful. There's so many different places you can access that. But I actually feel that the more powerful thing is that it's really about sprinkling it through the whole day. It's not just that 5-10 minutes of meditation that you might do with your kid before bed. It's actually all of that mindfulness in everyday life. So for me, there's lots of different ideas and things, but one of the things I try and do a lot is with my own emotions, giving language to emotions, which is really mindfulness. It's being aware of what's happening. And I will often sort of, if I have an emotion, I will narrate what I'm feeling by a lot, like in my body as well. Oh, they might have a tantrum, like I'm feeling you know, my heart's racing, or I'm feeling, or when they do something that's naughty, or, you know, and I'm feeling angry, I'll say, oh, I'm getting heat up my chest. And I really speak to the physiological signs and symptoms of emotion, and then I give it the name. So I think it's all of that work that's really powerful for kids, as opposed to, you wouldn't want to be forcing them to sit and push meditation on them and make it this sort of thing that they have an aversion to later on. And then it's also just everyday life, moving through life and getting them to be present, like look at the autumn leaves and what can you hear, and just helping them, you know, which they're actually pretty good at and probably better at than us adults, at being present in their senses in everyday life.
Yes, I dare say helping them to keep that alive rather than to lose it over time.
Yeah.
Often what happens is important part of so much of it seems to be what you're saying about modeling, what you model with your children.
Yeah, I think that is true for not just parents, but leaders in any context, that it is so much about your own embodied practice that then ripples out to people around you. And I've had a lot of people who've done Mindful in May each year come to me and say, my husband's telling me I have to do Mindful in May again because I've changed in the best way possible, and I'm so much more patient and less reactive. And so I think that speaks for itself. You know, you don't have to go around rabbiting on about mindfulness. It's just if you're practicing it, people around you notice that there's a stability and a non-reactivity when, you know, in the best. I'm definitely not suggesting that that's me. Like, you know, can ask my kids or my partner, I flip my lid. Mindfulness doesn't eliminate that from life, but it certainly helps me to recover more quickly when that happens.
Especially when you're mindful while you're doing it, you're conscious that you're flipping your lid. And
yeah, exactly.
It starts to open up that little window of opportunity
Yeah.
to making more informed choices. But one of the principles of Mindful in May is well is about starting small, forming habits, the importance of that. How did the 10-minute sort of begin? You know, what sort of was the catalyst for that idea?
Well, I was involved in the mindfulness-based stress reduction, the MBSR, which probably many of the listeners are aware of, if not have done or teaching. And that was sort of, I guess, John Kabat-Zinn had done a lot of research initially about that. It was a commitment of 30 to 40 minutes a day of meditation. And as I did that program, it was wonderful when I did it and did the training, but it occurred to me that this is not viable for a lot of people, you know, busy parent. It's just, that is a big ask. And to launch into that from zero is a bit intimidating. So I'd done a lot of learning about habits, and I'd had conversations with experts like BJ Fogg, who wrote that great book, Tiny Habits. And I was really understanding the architecture of forming habits, and that actually starting small can be very helpful. So I thought, well, what's the sort of lowest dose that you really can't make an excuse out of? Like, really, no one can say they don't have 10 minutes to do it. So it was just 10 minutes was that sort of smallest dose idea. And to commit every day over the month. So it was about really making it accessible and then building on to that, rather than starting so much that many people might fall off and then conclude that they're failed and then give up on it.
It's amazing how we can give ourselves reasons why we can't do something that we need to do in all sorts of ways, like and can't find 10 minutes in the day or whatever. That we're really, when we look at it, those kinds of self-sabotaging things don't stand up to scrutiny. But often if we're kind of automatic pilot, they just flip into the mind, we just go with it, kind of thing, that, you know, oh, can't find time, or just do this first, or I'm too tired. That's one that often comes up. I'm too tired to practice mindfulness. And like when you think about it, too tired to sit in the chair and do nothing for 10 minutes. It's like,
yeah, it's really interesting. I think what's also interesting is just the context we're living in right now with technology and this, you know, social media, and it's just becoming more and more intense. And now with AI, and, you know, as I heard one of these AI experts say, you know, we're ramping up the persuasion algorithms. And so we're really, for those of us who are engaged in technology as well in our life, there's a huge competition going on now of, you know, you say I'm too tired, and it's weird to think I'm too tired, I can't find 10 minutes to just sit and do nothing. But these algorithms are having such a strong impact on our lives. They're really hijacking the deepest, most primitive parts of our brains. And so to have some strength to not succumb to that in these times is truly an accomplishment. And that's why I think that mindfulness now is more relevant than ever, because I think it's almost mandatory that we need to have some kind of practice of awareness practice so that we can catch ourselves when we are getting sucked down the vortex of these powerful algorithms that take us into, content that's just not worthwhile, and it's literally just wasting our lives away.
Yeah, you did some research with Neil Bailey looking at this as well. What did you find in the research that you did? Neil Bailey, of course, Monash and works at ANU as well. And
yeah, so we did some research looking at the Mindful MA program, and specifically looking at, was 10 minutes of meditation over 1 month enough to have any kind of measurable benefits? And the research we did suggested that it was, and we certainly didn't have the budget to do brain scans and blood tests. And to be honest, I'm not sure whether that would have actually shown anything. I'm not sure if those changes would have petered down to the biology, but we used the flourishing scale, which is a well-known psychological tool. And we found that, yeah, by the end of a month, if people committed to 10 minutes a day, there were measurable benefits around perception of stress. So you're much better at perceiving your own stress, and therefore obviously that helps you to respond to stress more effectively, more present. Obviously they scored higher on the flourishing scale. There was a reduction in negative affect and an increase in positive affect, which is positive emotions. And there was also a dose response. So in the program, there is options to do more meditation, but we ask for a commitment of 10 minutes and we give those resources. So there was a dose response. So people that did more meditation had a larger effect, which is not surprising.
yes, that's it's one of the things, isn't it? You can do a course or but not really practice or apply it. And so you shouldn't expect an effect. But if you're really interesting to see that sort of dose response, the more people did, the more benefits, I suppose. The more exercise you do, the fitter you make.
Right. It makes sense, yeah.
So in terms of just coming to the back to Mindful in May, and you chose to support the provision of clean drinking water in Africa. Can you say a little bit more about all of the thousands of things you could have chosen, why you focused on that in particular?
Look, to be honest, it was a combination of both a personal experience and then political reasons. So in my 20s, I was fortunate to travel in West Africa. I spent 6 months in West Africa. And the one thing that you notice when you land in West Africa, I'm not sure now, this was about 20 years ago, is that there are a lot of these yellow water cans that women are walking around with on their heads. And I didn't know what was going on. And I very quickly discovered this global water crisis. And I learned more and more about it. And just the fact that in these villages where we were living, there was no access to clean, safe drinking water, and kids were dying, and girls predominantly were not being able to go to school because they were walking the entire day to go and collect water and bring it back, only to do it again the next day. So illnesses, lack of education. And I just thought, I just can't believe that in this world we're living in, even now 20 years later, with so much more technology, this is going on, that people actually don't have access to our most basic human need apart from oxygen. And so it just felt like a very basic, simple, no one can debate this. This is not a political matter about nations and, whatever, wars, etc. So I think no matter what country you're from, you can agree that this is a pretty dire situation. And so that was really where it came from. And then the organization that we partner with, Charity Water, was really innovative at the time. Now a lot of organizations have copied them, thankfully, in that they set up their structure that 100% of the donation actually makes it to the project. So they get benefactors to cover the admin. So it was just this combination of a number of things that led to that. And the other thing that's great is they give us sort of a report with the GPS location and images of the exact projects. And I feel that the fundraisers, people that donate money, feel a real sense of satisfaction to actually see exactly where their funds have gone.
Yes, much different to just sending it off somewhere and not seeing the actual fruits of that. Are there any particular highlights of the program this year that you wanted to sort of mention?
Look, this year we're replaying the best of MIM. So it's been running for over a decade. So this year, the program, we have actually pulled together the most popular and the most loved interviews from the last decade into one program. So we've got really, I mean, it's mindfulness in all kinds of domains. So we have Tara Bruck, who's talking about sort of mindfulness in relationships, Havel Hendricks, who's not specifically a mindfulness teacher, but really it is about mindfulness in marriage and intimacy. We have parenting experts, mindfulness parenting experts. So it's really, there's something for everyone there. And it's also, I get asked a lot, oh, is it okay? I've never meditated before. But then I have people saying, oh, I've meditated for 20 years. And somehow this program meets the needs of both those spectrums, because I think, as I think you would relate to, and I know for myself, that you can hear something once, but you hear it again at different times in your life and it lands differently and you take different things from it. So yeah, it's really about bringing mindfulness into everyday life, not just the 10 minutes of meditation a day.
Fantastic. Well, before we finish, we're going to hear a little bit more about how people can connect with Mindful in May. But I just wanted to see if there are any questions. I noticed a few things have popped up in the Q&A, and I'll just invite Jess to come on board and see if there are any questions that perhaps I'd like to throw in, Jess.
Sure. Hi everyone. I don't know where to start. We had quite a few. So I will throw at you, Elise. We had Frank and another participant interested in knowing about your experiences with other meditation techniques. Specifically, have you tried transcendental meditation?
Yep.
Experience the transcending mind. How does this differ to mindfulness?
Yeah, great. So I'm definitely not an expert in transcendental meditation, but I have done it and I understand the practice. And I would say what I've found is that you can access meditation from many different doors, and it's almost a little bit random as to which door you find. And it often happens to be a person you meet, or for me, as we talked about in the interview, it was, you know, my mum was into Buddhist meditation and mindfulness. So that was a door that had opened to me. I think that they all lead to a very similar place, which is, you know, getting beyond a sense of the self and sort of experiencing the truth of interconnection and the interdependence that we all have. And so I think it's great to try different meditations, and some people will gravitate towards one or the other. And I think as long as you find one that lands and keep pursuing that, then it will take you to the same place. I don't know what you think, Craig. I'd love to.
Oh, I would very much agree with the things you were saying. I suppose, you know, that mantra meditation, which is TM's a form of it, has got quite a rich history in cultures of East and West, but so have the principles of mindfulness as well. But different paths to coming back to the same point, I think, is perhaps an important way to look at it. And you said before, getting beyond the self and all this me thinking, which, you know, meditation of all sorts of can help us to get beyond that. But very interesting question. What else, Jess?
I'm going to combine a few because there was a few that sort of shared overlapping.
Could I add one more thing to that? The question, I think for me, the reason also why I became so sort of fascinated with mindfulness was that, and I'm not sure about this, I'm sure there is a lot of research with transcendental meditation, but I just became immersed in the science and the research that was coming out around mindfulness and brain changes and what was happening. And I'm sure there is that with transcendental, but I'm not sure how much. So that would be an interesting thing to explore as well.
Yeah. I think some of the early research from Herbert Benson in the 1980s, a lot of that was with TM or variations of that, which he was experimenting with. But yes, since the sort of modern revival, the great majority has certainly been on mindfulness, and I think that is one of the big drawing factors. Yes, Jess.
We've got, so Austin, he works in the field of international relations and interested in how mindfulness can address these major societal issues like climate change and inequality. He referenced scholars that work in the realm of population, ecologies, and economics. So how effective mindfulness can be globally if only a few countries adopt it. And additionally, yeah, let's start with that one. How does mindfulness influence society's response to these global crises?
I can have a stab at that one.
Yeah, no, you're no, please do.
Yeah, it's a big question.
It is.
Well, can I speak to my own personal experience? Because I think that's actually probably a good place to speak from in terms of the global crises going on, whether that's political, Black Lives Matter, climate. I think that for me, the question is, how can I be useful as an individual in the context of all these crises? And what's come up very strongly for me over time is this balance of being present and engaged with what's going on, but not falling into complete overconsumption in a way that I become traumatized and not able to actually function effectively and in a balanced, non-reactive way. So there's an interesting, I think mindfulness is relevant here in terms of how it can help you like balance this very sensitive sort of seesaw of how to stay engaged and present to the suffering in the world, but not become, and it kind of links to the empathic distress conversation we're having, not become distressed to a point that you are not able to function and contribute and think clearly and offer solutions. So that's one piece that I feel has been a personal kind of awareness for me around, you know, and having been to, I remember going to the Emergency Climate Summit here in Melbourne, and there was a period where I noticed I was really getting quite distressed and staying up late at night reading. And then it was the mindfulness that helped me go, hang on a sec, you've tipped over the edge here. Like you're losing your ground, you're becoming too activated, and this isn't helpful. And so sort of had to bring boundaries back in to modify like how I was engaging, and then look at like how can I be most helpful or functional in this space. So I don't know if that speaks exactly to what Austin was saying, but that's from my own personal experience.
Did the mindfulness help to maintain the kind of objectivity, balance that you needed to appraise, you know?
Yeah, I think it was the mindfulness helped me to sense that actually I was almost verging on anxiety, you know, around these issues, and that wasn't helpful for me at that time. And that wasn't actually, like, I think it's okay. It's, you know, you have to be engaged, and these things do create a feeling inside, and it's normal to have anxiety in relation to these global issues. But I think that we do need to be mindful of regulating ourselves and our nervous system so that we don't get, you know, overwhelmed and staying up with insomnia and not being able to actually meet them with an effectiveness. And I think there was something in there also about anger, which I think is a really interesting topic, which is probably like a whole webinar in itself in terms of anger and mindfulness and But I think also anger is, again, like anger is a powerful force, and I think it's a sign, and it's important for us. It shows us that something's happening that's violating what we think is okay. But at the same time, if we don't have awareness of the anger when it comes up, then we do stupid things. And you can see that all over the world at the moment, you know. So
fascinating thoughts, and I agree, Elise. It could be a whole webinar in itself, such an important topic. Jess, we got time for one more question.
Oh, well, it was around where can people find you, Elise, and where to follow. So I'm going to pop the Mindful in May web link in.
Yeah, it's just mindfulinmay.org is where the campaign is and where people can find out and register. And you can put in mindfulinmay.org. I think it's easier for people to just, mindfulinmay.org is the easier, and then it directs them to that. And then outside of Mindful in May, you know, I offer other programs, and I've got the book, The Happiness Plan, which is a runoff of Mindful in May for people that might be listening to this after May. And yeah, that's where they can find out more about it.
Yeah, we don't want to be in a dream world and miserable for 11 months of the year and then just reconnect once a year.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. It's been a real delight to have a conversation again and just see how your work and your enthusiasm, your passion has sort of grown, and the way that you've really nurtured this, you know, going through all self-doubt and everything else but how you've nurtured this. So it's really growing into, to use the metaphor, like quite a mighty sort of tree, and is giving so many other people shelter. So thank you, Elise. It's been a real delight.
Thank you so much. And thanks for all your support over the years. You were there right from the beginning.
Wonderful. And thank you, Jess, for your support and putting these webinars together. And we'll look forward to everybody's company later on in Mindful May at Monash, which is an alliteration arising from Mindful in May originally. So there'll be some other webinars later on and workshops and so on. So please have a look at those. And next month, in June, we'll be hearing from Sarah Lazar, one of the world's great contemplative neuroscientists, about how mindfulness in the brain and how all of this works. So thank you. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.